Good day. Welcome to the Bid More weekly webinar. Bid More is a program that equips local small businesses to win contract bids at the local, state, federal, and other organizational levels. During this live webinar, you will hear tips and best practices from trained experts on topics related to estimating and proposal writing. For even more free tips to help you create more informed bids and estimates, subscribe and like our YouTube channel entitled Bid More. Remember, the Bid More program encourages you to use every opportunity available to you to sharpen your saw to bid more and win more. At this time, please use the Q&A chat to post your name, business name, the services you provide, and what you would like to learn from today's webinar, as well as to ask your questions throughout the webinar. Enjoy. Okay, thank you for joining us for this presentation. Today we're going to talk about bid pricing structure. And we're going to interview Aaron Shalanson as well as Alex Fisher, who is here to join us and give us some great input on bid pricing structure. The ICAT Bid More consultants providing you with some information, some guidance that will help you in your pricing to assist you along the way. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so ICAT has Bid More 5 steps to proposal writing. First step, what is requested scope of work? Number 2, what are bidding requirements, including minimum requirements, evaluation criteria, and submission instructions? Step 3, what are required forms and guidelines for completing each form? Step 4, what are the required bidder documents? And step 5, which is what we'll be discussing in this particular presentation, what is the required pricing structure? So if you like to hear the the presentations on those previous steps, they are located in our YouTube channel. So please go and check those out. Today, this particular presentation is about pricing structure. So let's get ready to dive in. Let's go. Aaron, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
All right, let's go. Alex, are you ready?
Yes, I am geared up and ready to go.
Wonderful. Let's get started. All right. So it's always great to start off with some definitions. So what is pricing? What are we looking at when an organization sees that in a solicitation? Aaron?
Well, to answer that question, from with an accounting background that I have, pricing is simply the cost of your project, your expenses, plus a reasonable profit for conducting that project. And pricing is typically up to the company. It's up to the company to determine profitability and profit margins. So that's something that nobody else can really help you with. But pricing is simply considering how much it costs you and setting up a reasonable profit margin for conducting that project.
Okay, thank you. A nice, simply put response. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And where can you find pricing instructions?
Well, pricing instructions will often be found in a section called, bid proposal form, or on any other form within the solicitation title, pricing. Pricing, it can vary. It's going to be typically it's going to be specified in the general requirements or some requirement section. They're going to detail exactly what they're going to look for in that pricing, or they may detail that they don't want any pricing included as well.
Okay, all right. So thank you. So sometimes there may be a solicitation that does not include pricing. That's what you're telling us?
Yes, and I'll talk more about that, a little more about that later.
All right, thank you, because that really had me wondering, like, wow, okay, no pricing included. So thank you. Glad I'm going to learn a little bit more about that in a few minutes. All right, so let's keep going. When submitting pricing, how detailed should I be?
Well, I'd like to answer that question from two fronts. Okay. The first one is going to be external, and the second one is going to be internal response, internal to your company. All right. Externally to your company, you should always check your solicitation instructions. Be sure to follow them precisely. Don't add more than requested. You know, if they want a total flat rate, you're going to give them that. If they want pricing to be detailed, you know, things like labor categories, per hour rates, and a total cost to that, that's what you're going to supply them. So always be as, you know, specific to the instructions as possible. Now, internally, best practice is to start from the bottom of your pricing. What I mean by that is to be as detailed as possible in how much it's going to cost you to do this project. Start with that so you don't miss anything, and then come up with a profitability from there.
Hey, this is Alex. I'd like to chime in on this one as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alex.
You only want to be as detailed as the client needs you to be. Sometimes in solicitations, the client will give you, you know, forms or templates or sheets to kind of, they'll instruct you how detailed you need to be. They might give you a schedule of values. They might want pricing for items. They might want pricing for like whole sections of work. So if a form is supplied with the solicitation, then of course you follow the form. And sometimes they don't give you a form at all. They might give you a picture and say, here, you know, build this, design this, or they might ask for like a very vague scope of work and say, what do you think it's going to cost to get this done? If it's like, say, janitorial services for a 5-story building. So you kind of follow to whatever the client gives you. And then by all means, if you have questions, ask the client along the way.
That's an excellent point, especially with forms. Always use those forms. Don't ever deviate from what they supply you.
All right. Thank you both for sharing that information. That is greatly appreciated. All right. So, what are some ways pricing is submitted?
Some of the ways that you're going to submit pricing with your either proposal or your bid, it's going to be submitted, as we were talking about earlier, by form, you know, or template, essentially. Most solicitations will include some kind of form or template. Now, you know, when sometimes they'll ask for a price and they'll want it detailed. They'll tell you how to do it, but they may not include a form or some kind of template with it. And there are some programs out there that can help you, you know, structure and come up with a nice, neat form to submit with your pricing as well. Things like Excel. And there are some others.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Alex, anything you like to share, or we can just go ahead and keep going?
We can keep going.
All right. Sounds good. And should pricing always be submitted with the proposal or bid? I think this is what you were talking about earlier, that you were going to go into a little more detail with this, correct?
Yes.
All
So
right.
you should always look out if pricing is even required with your proposal or your bid. Some projects may specifically state, do not submit pricing with your proposal or your bid, or it'll specifically state in one of the previous lessons that we've talked about, where they'll detail out steps of the process where your first step will be to submit the proposal, then the proposal will be reviewed. Your next step then would be to submit the pricing at that time after you've been approved and so forth. So you always have to be on the lookout as to whether or not it's even needed at that time. there are situations where you're simply submitting a proposal that illustrates that you can do the job, how well you can do the job, and that is their evaluating factors to start. Once you get past that process, based on how many points you've earned, the highest points, the person with the most points goes to the next, the people, the top people with the most points, businesses, will go to the next step, and then they may submit pricing at that time. So it'll vary.
And
Okay.
to come in on that one, we did have one J sub that asked for some coaching a while back. He was submitting on a RFQ. It was a request for qualifications. Basically, it was a solicitation for an engineer to perform a certain type of engineering work. It was stormwater design. And they didn't want any, labor hours. They didn't want any pricing up front. They just wanted qualifications to make sure that his company and his personnel were qualified to do the job and his background area of experience. So if he was qualified for the solicitation and he won, well, then the next thing, they might issue a ITB, an invitation to bid on, say, like on a task work order or something. And then that's where he might submit pricing. Some solicitations will ask for pricing up front, but not always.
That was an excellent example. And I'd like to also say one of the, as sort of a best practice, when determining when you find out maybe you read that you do need pricing, always look for a form or a template within that solicitation that contains, like a per unit, per hour, or some flat rate, those types of words on that document, and that that's your price sheet.
Now, I will say this, I do have another example. For construction and engineering, a design build project. We had a contractor once, they were a design build firm. They were asked to design build 10 miles of sidewalk. Whatever it took to design build these 10 miles of sidewalk, had to fit within the project budget. So the company had to submit their proposal of one, how they were going to design it, two, how are they going to address obstacles in the field, and then three, they had to come up with their own pricing of items of how to complete this project. And several companies submitted. And of course, the one with the low bid always wins most of the time. But it was an interesting project where the bidder had to design the project, price the project, figure out the project, all within, say, the government's, budget of what they wanted to spend.
Wow, that does sound pretty unique. So, in your experience, Alex, have you seen many solicitations that way?
For the bigger, larger projects, it seems like things are going that way just because it's design build. The government entities, say if they're doing like say cable stay bridge or some kind of large construction project, well then they want the best company fitted for the job. And sometimes there's certain companies that only do very detailed, very large projects. So it all depends. If you're a design build firm, that's kind of like the field you stay in, is design build, because you're profitable.
Right.
So it varies. I mean,
Okay.
large projects versus small projects, you just never really know.
Okay. All right. Pretty interesting. Thank you so much. I appreciate your experience and expertise in assisting with answering this question. Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate those responses, guys. So let's go on. Always nice to know, what are some best practices? What are some best practices? All right, Aaron, what do you have to share with us?
I have just a few of the basic ones I'm going to start with, and I'm going to let Alex go into a few as well. My most obvious one is always, create checklists. I love that one because whenever you create checklists or you create any kind of list, you're less likely to forget or miss something. So lists,
Very
I think,
true.
are always the most important. Yes. So that one, take your time, read, make sure you understand, make sure that you know what is the scope of the project so you have an idea of the expenses for your company so you know that you're pricing it in a way that it's profitable. That's a few of mine.
Yeah, so for me, best practices, I always say, when you're putting pricing together, use the forms, use the checklist, never get in a hurry. You always want to put it together. You want to set it down. You want to walk away. You want to think about it. Maybe hand it to one of your colleagues or your coworkers or your partners. Let them review it. Let them look it over for you. Come back the next day, pick it up, reread it, make sure that the mindset that you were in the day before matches the mindset that you think you're in today. Because you never know whenever you overlook something or you miss something and you just don't know. When you look at it one day, you don't know what you might think about tomorrow that you overlooked.
Got it. All right. Thank you. And I'm sure by that overlooking something, it could be pretty costly to you as far as either uh, not profitable for you. It could be a cost that you have to take on, or it could cost you the solicitation.
It
So,
can't. I mean, in experience, I used to work for a company. We were doing construction management, and one of our cost estimators, he overlooked the second story of a building, and it turned out to be almost $1 million mistake.
wow.
Us pleaded our case with the client, and they did agree and were willing to pay for the second floor. But the cost estimator did lose his. So you never get in a rush. You always take your time. You always look at it. You always, if it's a large amount of money, get somebody else to read it. Make sure it makes sense.
Right.
Reread
Yes,
it sometimes, reread the solicitation. Just
absolutely.
your team
Yes.
eyes.
Yes, sounds like great experience because as you just stated, it could be a costly factor if you do not read, and reread. And I like the idea of sitting it down, walking away, coming back later, even the next day, getting another set of eyes to look at it. So that's great. Thank you. I appreciate that information. I appreciate those tidbits. All right. So let's see. I think maybe we have some examples. All right, Aaron, you want to speak to the examples we're looking at?
Yeah, I wanted to include a few examples here of what you might see on a basic construction project in this case, where they typically what they'll do is they'll itemize everything. They'll tell you how much they need, but they're going to want you to come up with a unit price and a total price for that work. So, you have to consider some factors like how much is the part or paint, or how much is it going to cost to do that, and how much profit do I want to tack on to that, and then determine your unit price that way, and then multiply it by the quantity. In some cases you might want to work or rework these. Don't use when you're first when you're first doing your pricing, don't use your main document that you're gonna be submitting. Use a temp or scratch document, because you may find that you're going to want to change these a few times over and over. So you need to submit a clean, legible, easy to read document, and also check for signatures. In some cases, like with this type of pricing sheet, they usually want a signature at the end of it. So always look out for those whenever you're placing your bid. And then the next example is for a utility tap in program. So the previous sheet actually ties into this form, which is your bid summary form. This is your main form that you're gonna put, on the top, because the order that you typically put these documents in, always check your list, make sure that you're putting them in the correct order. But typically this one will sit on top, and you notice that this is where you put your overall price of the project, because that's what they're going to want to look at first. They're going to want to look at that bid amount at the top, and then they'll look at the more detailed after you get into the door and start moving it down the bid process.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And do we have another? Let's see.
This one is an example of a more detailed type pricing sheet. This one, they want to run a facility, so they need staff to do that. And essentially with this one, you have to determine how many staff members you're going to need to run that, that's going to be needed to run that facility reasonably. You're going to have to estimate the hours. Make sure when it comes to that, you read that contract scope. Know how long this contract is going to be. So how many hours is the personnel going to need to put into this project? Determine a reasonable hourly rate, whatever that baseline is for that particular position, plus, what profit you want to make. And then also, this one's a good example because they want fringe benefits too. So determining fringe benefits, the expense on that may be more, unique, business to business, but, you can't forget that too. They want that separate. And then they also want some of the indirect costs. And in that case, this is where you need to be, detailed. You need to list what those indirect costs are going to be and then total all of that up.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So just curious, and maybe I'm going off script here, but when it talks about indirect cost, can you give like an example of what an indirect cost could be? Or Alex, could you kind of chime in and give an example what an indirect cost could be?
Sure. Indirect costs. I mean, that can be transportation. It could be meals during transportation. It could be hotel cost. It could be
Lodging.
lodging. It could be something that's required to actually perform the job, say like office supplies or like a computer program,
Okay.
something to the actual solicitation project.
Or like a timekeeping system. That's another one, to manage your hourly, to manage your personnel.
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you guys for sharing that. I appreciate that. Let's see. All right. And that is our questions and examples for this particular presentation. So as always, thank you for listening in and listening to Alex and Aaron. We appreciate you guys so very much for joining us today and answering our questions and providing examples for our viewers to listen to and look at. So with that being said, thank you. Thank you for tuning in to this week's Bid More webinar. We know you will use this knowledge, tips, and insight in your future bidding activities. Please use this time to ask your questions in the Q&A chat. For even more free tips to help you create more informed bids and estimates, subscribe and like our YouTube channel entitled Bid More. Remember, the Bid More program encourages you to use every opportunity available to you to sharpen your saw to bid more and win more. Take care.